What is empire? Empire is the desire to expand a sphere of influence. Empire is a desire to increase access to resources, access to expertise and manpower. Empire is expansive, seeking to know more of the world. Empire, on the darker side, also relies on othering, right? We have a right to take over territory and impose our will on the world because our way is a better way, something like that. And so that notion of spreading a superior culture feels like it's a part of empire building.
Empire, will, imposition, control. Control of territory, control of resources, reproduction of the ego in the cosmos. Empire has no bounds. The imperial will wants to conquer all and waits for the next weakness to be able to take over more territory, to absorb more energy. The emperor at the core, spinning a web all over the universe until its control is total.
So keywords there: conquering, control, domination, those kinds of feelings. Are they essential to empire? Is it necessarily average? Is it necessarily power seeking? Historically, it definitely does seem to be that way. Is it possible for some of the things mentioned in the first bit, so, you know, expansion of horizons, increasing knowledge, you know, increasing reach around the world, but not necessarily in a malign way? Is it possible? Is it an empire if it is built collaboratively? Is not quite the right word. Does empire necessarily involve subjugation, conquering, oppression, and so on?
Empire, violence, war, the expansion of the self to contain all of being, or the expansion of the ego to contain all being, possessing being for the benefit of the ego, or possessing being for the benefit of the self. Self with a big S being possessed by being for the benefit of being. The equality of the inner and the outer, or the devouring of the outer for the benefit of the inner. Feed the void at the core with more and more territory, more and more energy.
So empire is rooted in ego, the ego's desire to impose itself on the world. And so, yes. So there's an arrogance then in empire, right? That I am so good, I am so right, that there's a righteousness, is there not, in empire building? It's not just, or maybe that's just a justification for the greed and the violence, because it's theft as well, right? You are the territory that you take over, you are robbing the inhabitants of that territory of their way of life. So there's a callousness alongside the arrogance. Yeah, ego.
Empire. The ego devouring, hungry, never satiated. Spinning an empire down the generations, planting dark seeds so they continue to blossom, creating all of the inciting beauties of empire with the resources I have stolen, with the territory which I believe I deserve to inherit the kingdom of the earth. With this, I make some beauty to hypnotize.
The emperor usually has some kind of justification for being the emperor, God's chosen one, or something like that, right? The dragon slayer, whatever it might be. And so the myth of the emperor is part of the building of the empire, right? The story. It's not just the violence, the armies, yes, that's the initial takeover, but the maintenance of the empire relies on buying into a narrative about the empire. Now, that must necessarily be a false narrative, because the empire is manifestation of the ego out of control.
The emperor as a sick monarch, a corrupted monarch who knows not the limits of their kingdom, does not know how to respect different kingdoms that exist, that thinks themselves more divine than they actually are. The emperor has no clothes. The emperor's robes are what distinguishes the emperor from the others. Their appearance, their crown. This myth is one half of perpetuating the empire. The other one is to institutionalize fear.
Hungry ghosts. So the emperor is the shadow of the king, right? The king bestows blessing on his kingdom, respects the boundaries of adjacent kingdoms. The emperor is the tyrant form of the king, right? The willful spreading of himself across the world. But the tyrant is underpinned by, the tyrant is the bipolar form of the weakling, and so the weakling is the true nature of the emperor, because it is rooted in ego, because it is not because the connection to the divine is not actually embodied. It's a sham. The emperor is actually terrified.
The fear of the core of the emperor, and thus the need to possess all of being, to tame being, to prevent being from devouring the emperor, for the emperor possesses all of being. The emperor thinks if they can accumulate enough matter, then they will be able to block the void at the core. And some think, ah, yes, look at me. I continue down the generations, 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years, 2,000 years, they still speak of me. And they forget that the void at the core is infinite.